Let's start by sorting out the difference between groups, categories, and crowds. A category is made up of people who share something in common, like an age, an occupation, or a social status. But being part of the same category doesn't necessarily mean these people interact or feel connected. For example, all first year university students technically fall into the same category. They're the same status, but unless they actively interact, they're not functioning as a group. A crowd, on the other hand, is people who happen to be in the same place at the same time. Think about people waiting in line for a concert or gathering at a sports event. They're together physically, but that doesn't mean they're bonded in any real way. Their connection is temporary and usually ends once the event is over. Now, a social group is different. A group involves real interaction and a sense of belonging. Members recognize themselves as part of something larger than just individual people standing side by side. It's that recognition and interaction that make a social group more meaningful than just a category or a crowd. In sociology, we often break down social groups into two broad types: primary groups and secondary groups. A primary group is a small, close-knit group where the relationships run deep and usually last a long time. These are the people we're closest to: our families, our closest friends, maybe a small circle in a community setting. What makes these groups special is the quality of the relationships. In primary groups, people spend a lot of time together and share many activities. There's emotional closeness, loyalty, and a sense that the relationship itself matters more than any outside goal. The family is the most important example because it's usually where we first learn norms, values, and even how to see ourselves in the world. What's important to keep in mind is that members of primary groups see each other as unique and irreplaceable. For example, your relationship with a sibling or parent isn't something you could just swap out for someone else. Those bonds aren't about what someone can do for you. They exist for the connection itself. Think about the difference between calling a family member just to talk versus reaching out to a coworker only when you need something for a project. That's the essence of primary groups. They shape who we are, and they provide the emotional foundation for our sense of identity and belonging. Secondary groups, on the other hand, look very different from primary groups. These groups are usually larger and more impersonal. We join them not for emotional closeness, but to accomplish specific goals or take part in certain activities. Members of secondary groups may interact regularly, but the relationships tend to stay formal and task-focused. For example, think about your classmates in a large lecture hall or your coworkers in a big company. You spend time together, but that doesn't automatically mean you're emotionally close. These groups are often temporary and tied to a task. Once the project ends or the activity is over, the group might dissolve or the members may move on. The emotional ties are weaker, and the focus is much more on the goal than the people themselves. A workplace committee or a student club that organizes events are good examples. You cooperate with others and may even enjoy working together, but the relationship is primarily about getting the job done rather than building deep personal bonds. In fact, think about the classroom you're in right now. As a class, we form a secondary group. We've come together for a shared purpose, learning sociology, but our relationships are more formal and centered on that goal. Over time, though, smaller primary groups can develop out of this larger secondary group. Friendships may form that go beyond the classroom and take on that deeper, more personal quality. Now let's shift to an essential part of group dynamics: leadership. In any group, leadership plays a big role in shaping how effective the group is, how members feel, and how well the group functions overall. Leadership isn't just about giving orders. It's about guiding the group in ways that can look very different depending on the situation. Sociologists usually talk about 2 main leadership roles and then 3 main leadership styles. Let's take them one at a time. First, the roles. Instrumental leadership is task-focused. Leaders in this role are all about getting things done, setting goals, staying on track, and making sure the group meets its objectives. Their main concern is efficiency and productivity. You can picture a manager at work who sets deadlines, assigns tasks, and monitors progress. That's instrumental leadership in action. Expressive leadership, on the other hand, is people-focused. Leaders in this role care more about group morale and relationships. They work to resolve conflicts, build harmony, and keep everyone feeling supported. Think of a team captain who cheers people on, encourages cooperation, and makes sure the group stays united. They're less concerned with strict rules and more concerned with maintaining a positive group atmosphere. Both roles are important. A group that only has instrumental leadership might get things done quickly, but members could feel burned out or disconnected. A group that only has expressive leadership might feel great about working together, but struggle to meet its goals. The most effective groups usually have a balance of the two. Now, beyond those roles, there are also different leadership styles. Basically, different ways leaders make decisions and interact with the group. The three main styles are authoritarian, democratic, and laissez-faire. Authoritarian leadership is very task-oriented. Leaders who use this style make decisions on their own and expect strict compliance from others. It's like a military officer giving commands and expecting immediate obedience. This style can be useful in emergencies or situations where quick, decisive action is needed. But over time, it can hurt morale and stifle creativity if group members feel they don't have a voice. Democratic leadership is more inclusive. Leaders using this style invite input from group members, encourage collaboration, and take different perspectives into account before making decisions. Think of a teacher who lets students shape class discussions or contribute ideas about assignments. This style usually creates stronger group satisfaction and is especially effective when creativity and problem-solving are needed. Finally, there's laissez-faire leadership, which is hands-off. Leaders using this approach give minimal direction and let group members work independently. This can be great for a group of highly skilled, self-motivated people, like a research team where each member is an expert. The leader trusts them to manage their own work. But if the group lacks structure or motivation, laissez-faire leadership can quickly turn into disorganization. So leadership can take different forms, but whether it's about keeping people on task, maintaining group harmony, or choosing how decisions get made, it always has a big impact on how groups function. It's easy to focus on the leader in a group, but the role of followers is just as important. A leader can only be effective if the people they're leading are engaged, competent, and willing to contribute. Without that, even the strongest leadership will struggle to get results. Followers aren't passive. They're not just there to obey instructions. They have an active responsibility to think critically about the direction the group is heading. Sometimes, that even means questioning leadership. If followers believe a decision or policy is harmful, unfair, or simply misguided, they have an obligation to raise concerns or push back in a constructive way. For example, imagine a group of employees questioning a manager's new policy because they believe it will hurt the team's morale or performance. By speaking up, they're not being disloyal. They're helping the group avoid potential harm. Good followers take their responsibilities seriously. They perform their roles in a timely and competent way, provide leaders with accurate and useful information, and when necessary, practice what's sometimes called intelligent disobedience, the ability to respectfully resist when a leader's decision goes against the best interests of the group or organization. So just like leaders, followers play an active part in whether a group thrives or struggles. Leadership and followership go hand in hand. Now let's turn to group conformity, one of the most powerful ideas in sociology. Conformity is about how groups influence the behavior of their members. Whenever we're part of a group, whether it's with friends, coworkers, or classmates, there's often subtle, unspoken pressure to fall in line with the group's norms and expectations. Sometimes this helps create unity and cohesion. Other times, it can cause people to set aside their own judgment, and in extreme cases, even participate in harmful behavior. To really understand how conformity works, let's look at 3 classic studies: Ash's experiment on conformity, Milgram's obedience study, and Janus's concept of groupthink. The first is Ash's research on conformity. In the 1950s, he set up an experiment to see how much people would go along with a group, even when they knew the group was clearly wrong. Participants were asked to take part in a simple visual test, comparing line lengths. What they didn't know was that everyone else in the room was an actor, intentionally giving wrong answers on certain trials. The surprising result was that many participants went along with the group's wrong answers, even when the correct one was obvious. The takeaway is that peer pressure is powerful. People often conform just to avoid standing out, even if it means going against their own judgment. Think about a time you went along with your friend's choice of movie or restaurant, even though you wanted something else. You may not have cared enough to speak up, but that's a small-scale version of the same pressure Ash's experiment revealed. The second study is Milgram's research on obedience in the 1960s. He wanted to test how far people would go when following orders from an authority figure. In his experiment, participants were told to administer electric shocks to another person, who was an actor and not actually being shocked, whenever they gave a wrong answer. As the shocks increased, the victim cried out in pain. Still, the experimenter in a lab coat calmly told the participants to continue. A startling number of people obeyed, continuing to administer shocks even when they believed they were causing serious harm. This shows just how strong the influence of authority can be. People may follow directives from someone they see as legitimate, even when it clashes with their own moral beliefs. We see smaller versions of this in everyday life, like employees who follow workplace policies they disagree with because that's what the boss said. On a larger scale, it helps us understand how ordinary people can be led into committing harmful acts in the name of obedience. Finally, we have Janice's idea of groupthink. Groupthink happens when a group is so focused on agreement and unity that members stop critically evaluating ideas. Instead of encouraging debate, people silence their doubts or avoid raising objections to keep the peace. The result is poor decision-making because alternative perspectives never get a fair hearing. You can probably think of examples in your own life where groupthink showed up. Maybe in a group project where everyone just went along with the first idea to avoid conflict, even though you knew it wasn't the best approach. On a bigger scale, groupthink has been linked to major historical events where disastrous decisions were made because people valued consensus over questioning authority. So whether it's peer pressure, obedience to authority, or the drive for group harmony, conformity shows us just how much being part of a group can shape what we think and how we act. In this part of the lecture, we're going to look at reference groups, in-groups, out-groups, and how factors like group size, diversity, and networks shape the way we interact. These concepts help us understand how we evaluate ourselves, how we relate to others, and how the dynamics of groups shift depending on their structure and makeup. Let's start with reference groups. A reference group is any social group we use as a standard when making evaluations or comparisons about ourselves. Whether it's deciding what to wear, choosing a career path, or measuring how successful we feel, we often look to certain groups for guidance. For example, if you're considering college, you might compare yourself to friends who are already enrolled. Their choices and achievements become a point of reference for your own. What's important here is that people don't just compare themselves to anyone. We choose specific groups that feel relevant to our situation. A worker might compare themselves to coworkers in the same role, not to people in totally different jobs. That's because the comparisons only feel meaningful when they're tied to our own context. This selective comparison shapes how we feel about ourselves. Success and failure often feel relative depending on the reference group we're using. Take students as an example. If everyone struggled on an exam, an average grade might feel like a win. But if everyone else aced it, that same grade could feel disappointing. The reference group we choose makes a huge difference in how we evaluate ourselves. Now let's turn to in-groups and out-groups, which are central to how we form identities and social bonds. An in-group is any group toward which we feel loyalty, respect, and belonging. This might be your close circle of friends, a professional organization you're part of, or even a sports team you support. The key is that sense of connection. You see yourself as one of us. An out-group, on the other hand, is a group you don't belong to and may even feel opposed to or in competition with. Think about rival sports fans. If you strongly support one team, their fan base feels like your in-group. while rival fans become the outgroup. This divide between in-groups and out-groups can strengthen bonds within the group, but it can also create tension, conflict, or rivalry across groups. High school cliques are a simple example. You may have felt close to your own friend group, but saw other cliques, like the athletes or the popular kids, as outsiders you didn't relate to, or maybe even competed against. Now let's talk about group size and how it shapes the way people interact. The number of members in a group has a big impact on its stability, its intensity, and the kinds of relationships that form inside it. The simplest type of group is a dyad, which is a group of two people. Dyads are the smallest possible group, and they tend to be very intense because the two members rely completely on each other. But they're also fragile. If one person pulls away or leaves, the group no longer exists. Think about a romantic relationship or a close friendship. When it's just the two of you, the bond can feel strong and personal, but it's also vulnerable if the connection breaks down. Now compare that to a triad, which is a group of three people. Triads are generally more stable than dyads because if one person steps back, the other two can still keep the group going. But triads also introduce a new dynamic: coalitions. Two members can align with each other and outvote or outinfluence the third. Think about a group of three friends. Two might agree on what to do and leave the third feeling outnumbered. That makes the group more stable, but also a little more complicated than a dyad. So, the size of a group doesn't just change the number of people involved. It changes the entire structure of relationships and the balance between intensity and stability. Alongside group size, social diversity also shapes how groups interact. Factors like race, class, and gender influence not only who we connect with, but also how open groups are to forming relationships beyond themselves. There are three main patterns to keep in mind. First, large groups tend to turn inward. When a group is big, members are more likely to stick with their own circle and form subgroups inside it, instead of reaching out to outsiders. It's easier, it feels familiar, and it keeps things manageable. Think about a large company. People in one department often mainly socialize with each other, rather than mixing much with employees in other departments. Second, heterogeneous groups, those that are more diverse, tend to turn outward. When a group includes people from different backgrounds and perspectives, it's usually more open to engaging with outsiders. The variety within the group encourages members to connect with people beyond their immediate circle. For example, a multicultural student organization on campus is often more likely to engage with other groups and communities than a homogeneous one. Finally, physical boundaries create social boundaries. Where groups are located makes a difference in whether they interact. Gated communities, separate office spaces, or schools in different neighborhoods can limit contact between groups simply because they don't share the same spaces. Without that physical connection, social separation often follows. So, diversity shapes group dynamics in important ways, sometimes drawing people inward into tight circles, sometimes opening them outward to new connections, and sometimes separating them because of the spaces they occupy. Next, we turn to networks. A social network is essentially a web of weak social ties. These are people we may have only occasional contact with, people who aren't necessarily part of a close-knit group, and who don't provide us with a strong sense of belonging or clear boundaries. Even so, networks give us the feeling that we live in a small world where opportunities and connections are just a few steps away. Unlike primary groups, which are built on emotional bonds, networks are more about the exchange of information, resources, and opportunities. They can be a powerful tool for things like finding a job, getting advice, or becoming established in a new community. Gender also plays a role in shaping networks, influencing who we connect with and how those connections function. Professional networking is a good example. At a career event or on a platform like LinkedIn, the people you connect with may not be close friends, but they can still open doors by introducing you to others or sharing useful opportunities. Social media works in a similar way. Think about the people on your friend list or follower count. You may not interact with most of them regularly, but those weak ties can still be valuable. Sometimes, it's the person you least expect who shares a job posting, offers advice, or connects you with someone new. At the largest scale, the internet itself is one massive global network. In Canada, for example, 94% of households have internet access at home. That means most people in this country are capable of connecting not just with one another, but with billions of others around the world. Computer technology has expanded the scope of social networking in ways that people a generation ago couldn't have imagined. But this raises an important question. If most of us are connected, who's being left out? Which categories of people might not have access to these networks? That question reminds us that even in a digital age, inequality still shapes how people connect or don't connect to the wider world. Now, let's look at the role of social media and networking in contemporary society. Over the last decade, computer-based platforms have completely changed the way we communicate, connect, and interact with one another. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X, formerly Twitter, have connected people across the globe in ways that would have seemed impossible not long ago. This shift hasn't just touched personal relationships. It's also transformed how information spreads, how businesses operate, and even how social movements gain momentum. Social media is no longer just about staying in touch with friends. It has become central to politics, culture, and everyday life. These platforms have exploded in popularity, with billions of people actively using them. They make it possible for people from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds to connect instantly, share ideas, and form communities, even when they've never met face-to-face. Each platform has its own style and purpose. Facebook started as a college networking site, but today it connects over 2 billion people who share stories, updates, and family photos. X, or Twitter, is all about real-time conversation, debate, and the rapid spread of news. Instagram focuses on visual storytelling, with people building personal or professional identities through curated photos and videos, sometimes even entire careers. And TikTok has exploded into a global stage for short-form video, driving cultural trends and sparking conversations that spread far beyond the app itself. But social media isn't only about broadening networks. It also plays a huge role in shaping personal identity. Every post, photo, or comment becomes part of the image we project to others. This process, called impression management, is about choosing how we want to be seen. Social media also makes identity more fluid. A single person might present different sides of themselves on different platforms, sharing professional achievements on LinkedIn, creative projects on Instagram, and humor or personal opinions on TikTok. This flexibility can be empowering because it allows us to express multiple identities at once. But it can also be stressful, since many people feel pressure to present a polished, idealized version of themselves online. In this way, social media is both liberating and exhausting. What all these platforms have in common is that they let us maintain existing relationships while also creating new ones. They extend our networks far beyond geography and allow us to build communities around shared interests, identities, or goals. Social networks are the web of relationships and connections people maintain. In the past, most of these connections were local. You interacted mainly with neighbors, coworkers, classmates, or others you saw in person on a regular basis. But with the rise of social media, the structure of networks has changed in a dramatic way. Now, social media makes it possible to maintain weak ties with far more people than ever before. Weak ties are relationships that aren't especially close but still matter. They're valuable because they give us access to new information, fresh opportunities, and even support that we might not always get from our closest relationships. For instance, LinkedIn allows people to connect with colleagues, potential employers, and professional networks, opening doors to career opportunities. On Twitter, now called X, users can follow public figures, industry leaders, or activists and engage with their ideas without needing a personal relationship. When you add all these weak ties together, they create social capital, the resources and opportunities that flow from being part of a network. The bigger and more diverse your network, the more access you have to different perspectives and opportunities. The importance of these networks became even clearer during the COVID-19 pandemic. Starting in 2020, the pandemic disrupted nearly every aspect of social life. Lockdowns cut back face-to-face contact with coworkers and peers, increased social isolation, and shifted most of daily life into the home. For many people, that meant more time with family, but also less interaction with the wider world. In that context, virtual groups and online networks became lifelines. Digital platforms gave people spaces to work, learn, and stay connected when in-person contact wasn't possible. The pandemic didn't just highlight the role of social media, it showed how dependent we've become on virtual networks to keep group life going in times of crisis. Next, let's turn to formal organizations, which are a key part of modern society. Formal organizations are large, structured groups that exist to achieve specific goals as efficiently as possible. They're very different from the small personal groups we've talked about earlier. Instead of intimacy and close ties, these groups are built around tasks, rules, and efficiency. Think about corporations, schools, hospitals, or government offices. All of these are formal organizations. They shape not just our work lives, but also our social life and the broader economic system we live in. Unlike primary groups like families or circles of friends, formal organizations are secondary groups. They're larger, more impersonal, and very goal-oriented. People usually join them to accomplish something specific, earning money, advancing a cause, or fulfilling societal needs. To make this possible, they rely on structured processes, defined roles, and clear rules. Now, formal organizations don't all look the same. We can group them into three main types based on why people join them: utilitarian, normative, and coercive organizations. The first type is utilitarian organizations. These are groups people join because they provide material rewards, most often a paycheck. For example, businesses, corporations, or government agencies fall into this category. People become members of these organizations in exchange for income and benefits. These organizations are structured for efficiency, with clear roles and expectations to ensure the work gets done. The second type is normative organizations, sometimes called voluntary associations. Here, people join not for money, but for a sense of purpose. Membership is voluntary, and the motivation comes from shared values or goals. Think of nonprofits, charities, religious groups, or environmental organizations. People might volunteer at a food bank, join a religious community, or campaign for sustainability. The rewards aren't financial, but moral. Members feel fulfillment because their personal values align with the group's mission. Finally, we have coercive organizations. These are organizations people don't choose to join. Instead, they're forced into them, usually as a form of punishment, rehabilitation, or control. Prisons, certain mental health institutions, or mandatory draft camps are examples. In these organizations, people have limited freedom, often under physical confinement or strict regulation. The goal is usually to control or change behavior, whether through discipline, treatment, or rehabilitation. So whether people join willingly for pay, volunteer for a cause, or are forced into membership, formal organizations are one of the major ways modern societies structure group life. Now that we've covered the different types of formal organizations, let's step back and look at where they came from and how they've evolved over time. Early organizations were much less efficient than the ones we see today, largely because they lacked the technology that makes large-scale coordination possible. In pre-industrial societies, organizations faced serious limitations. People couldn't travel long distances quickly, communication across large areas was slow and unreliable, and systems for collecting and storing information were very basic. With these barriers, large organizations had a hard time functioning smoothly. Decision-making was slow, coordination was limited, and growth was difficult. This brings us to the shift from tradition to rationality. In pre-industrial societies, tradition guided most aspects of life. Tradition means relying on long-standing customs, values, and beliefs passed down from generation to generation. It tends to encourage conservatism, with people sticking to the way things have always been done and resisting change. But as societies modernized, a different way of thinking began to take hold: rationality. Rationality is about deliberate, matter-of-fact calculation, finding the most efficient way to accomplish a task. Instead of relying on customs, people began focusing on planning, strategy, and measurable outcomes. This shift created the foundation for modern bureaucratic organizations. Weber referred to this process as the rationalization of society, the move from a tradition-based worldview to one rooted in rational calculation and efficiency. Over time, human thought and social organization became less about customs and rituals and more about logic, planning, and outcomes. A clear example is the way modern businesses operate. They don't rely on tradition to decide how to sell products or manage workers. Instead, they rely on rational systems, market research to understand consumers, performance metrics to track productivity, and strategic planning to maximize profit. This emphasis on efficiency and calculation is what sets modern organizations apart from earlier ones. As societies became more rational, the need for structured, goal-oriented organizations grew. This led to the rise of bureaucracies, which Weber described as the most rational and efficient way to organize large groups of people. A bureaucracy is an organizational model designed to perform tasks efficiently by dividing responsibilities, creating formal rules, and establishing a clear chain of command. In theory, this structure allows organizations to operate smoothly, consistently, and predictably, even as they grow larger. Bureaucracies have many strengths. They ensure that specialized tasks are handled by people with the right expertise, they provide clear authority and accountability, and they standardize processes so things get done the same way every time. But there are drawbacks, too. Many people who work in bureaucratic systems describe feeling like cogs in a machine, doing repetitive tasks with little sense of purpose or connection to the bigger mission. So while bureaucracies are highly effective, they can also feel alienating. Weber outlined 6 key features of an ideal bureaucracy. These characteristics help us understand how bureaucracies function and why they're often seen as the most rational way to organize. The first is specialization. In a bureaucracy, individuals are assigned highly specific jobs based on their skills. This allows them to focus narrowly, which increases efficiency. A hospital is a good example. Doctors specialize in areas like cardiology or neurology, while nurses, technicians, and administrators each have their own defined roles. The result is expertise in every task. The second is the hierarchy of positions. Bureaucracies are built vertically with a clear chain of command. Each position reports to someone above it, ensuring that authority and responsibility are clearly laid out. For instance, in a corporation, the CEO sits at the top, followed by managers, supervisors, and employees. This hierarchy keeps decision-making and accountability organized. Third, bureaucracies operate according to rules and regulations. These rules are designed to create consistency and predictability. Think about going to a government office like the DMV. Everything follows a standardized process, from filling out forms to submitting documents, so everyone is treated the same way. The fourth feature is technical competence. People are expected to have the skills and knowledge necessary to do their jobs, often proven through exams, training, or qualifications. For example, civil service positions often require candidates to pass exams to demonstrate their ability before being hired. The fifth is impersonality. Bureaucracies are supposed to operate based on rules, not personal feelings or favoritism. The idea is that everyone should be treated the same way, whether they're a worker or a client. A university admissions process is a good example. Students are evaluated by standardized criteria like grades and test scores, not by personal connections. Finally, bureaucracies rely on formal written communication. Policies, decisions, and reports are documented to create a paper trail that ensures accountability and consistency. Think about the role of contracts, memos, or emails in a workplace. Everything is written down so there's a clear record. Together, these 6 elements make bureaucracy a powerful tool for organizing large-scale activity. But they also highlight why people sometimes feel constrained or depersonalized within bureaucratic systems. While the 6 elements we just covered define the internal structure of bureaucracies, it's important to remember that formal organizations don't exist in a vacuum. How well an organization performs depends not only on its internal rules and policies, but also on the organizational environment, the external factors that shape its day-to-day operations. These outside influences can be just as important as what happens inside the organization. For example, technology plays a huge role. New tools for communication or automation can streamline operations and make bureaucracies far more efficient. Economic and political trends also matter. A downturn in the economy might force a company to cut staff, while new government regulations could require organizations to adjust their policies or practices. Population patterns affect demand for products and services. An aging population, for instance, increases the need for healthcare services and retirement planning. Current events can have sudden, dramatic effects. Natural disasters, pandemics, or political unrest can disrupt even the most carefully designed systems. Finally, other organizations in the same environment, whether competitors, partners, or regulatory bodies, can push an organization to adapt. For instance, if one company innovates, others often follow to stay competitive. Even though bureaucracies are designed to run on rules, hierarchy, and formal procedures, there's always an informal side to how they actually work. People don't just follow the manual. They adapt, personalize, and sometimes resist the structure in creative ways. For example, employees often make their workspaces more personal and human. In an office, you might see cubicles decorated with family photos, plants, or small personal items. These touches soften the impersonal feel of the bureaucracy and help people feel more at home. Informal networks also form inside bureaucracies. Friendships, alliances, and social circles develop that exist outside of the official hierarchy but still play an important role in how things actually get done. Sometimes, information moves faster through the office grapevine than it does through formal memos. Technology has also made communication less rigid. In many organizations today, even the lowest-ranking employee can send an email directly to a top leader, flattening the hierarchy in ways that traditional bureaucracies never intended. And of course, not everyone accepts bureaucracy passively. Leaders sometimes use their positions for personal gain, bending rules or abusing power. On the other hand, employees may resist bureaucracy in subtle but persistent ways, through creativity, stubbornness, or simply finding workarounds that make their jobs more manageable. All of this shows that while bureaucracies are built to be rational and formal, real-world organizations are shaped just as much by the informal practices of the people inside them. While bureaucracies are designed to be efficient and rational, in practice, they often run into serious problems that limit their effectiveness. These issues show us the gap between the ideal model and the lived reality of organizational life. The first problem is bureaucratic alienation. In highly regulated, impersonal systems, workers can start to feel disconnected from the products of their labor and from the people they serve. Instead of feeling valued, they may feel like they're just cogs in the machine. This sense of detachment can create frustration and burnout. Think of an assembly line worker who repeats the same task all day without ever seeing the final product or interacting with customers. The work gets done, but the person may feel no real purpose in it. The second problem is bureaucratic inefficiency and ritualism. Ironically, the very rules meant to make bureaucracies efficient can slow them down. Ritualism happens when organizations become so obsessed with following procedures that they lose sight of their actual goals. This is where we get the idea of red tape. Long, frustrating processes full of forms, approvals, and delays, even when the task itself could be done much more simply. Third, we have bureaucratic inertia. Once established, bureaucracies often take on a life of their own. They can become self-perpetuating, continuing to exist long after their original purpose is no longer relevant. For example, a government agency might be created to solve a specific problem, but even after that issue has been addressed, the agency continues operating because its employees and leaders want to preserve their jobs and budgets. Finally, there's the problem of oligarchy, the concentration of power in the hands of a small group at the top. As bureaucracies grow, their pyramid-shaped hierarchy often leads to decision-making being dominated by a few leaders. Lower-level employees may feel they have little say in how things are run. Large corporations and political organizations are classic examples. Despite thousands of members or employees, a small group of executives or officials usually hold most of the power. Together, these problems highlight the paradox of bureaucracy. It is designed to maximize efficiency and fairness, but it can also produce alienation, inefficiency, self-preservation, and concentrated power. Now, let's look at how formal organizations have evolved over time. These changes reflect broader shifts in management styles, workforce diversity, globalization, and the changing nature of work itself. As organizations have adapted, they've had to grapple with challenges like race and gender inclusion, international comparisons, and new ways of structuring work. We'll also look at the idea of a McDonaldization, which captures how efficiency-driven systems shape modern society. Let's start with scientific management, a concept that emerged in the early 20th century. Scientific management was all about applying scientific principles to the operation of a business or large organization. The central goal was to maximize efficiency by carefully studying how workers perform their tasks and then reorganizing those tasks for better productivity. This approach unfolded in 3 steps. First came observation. Managers would carefully watch workers and break down each task into its smallest parts to see exactly how it was being done. Second was data analysis. After collecting observations, managers analyzed them to figure out the most efficient way to perform the task. This might mean changing the order of steps, reorganizing the workflow, or introducing new tools. Finally, there was guidance and incentives. Managers would then provide workers with clear instructions and often tie performance to rewards, such as bonuses for meeting targets. For its time, scientific management was groundbreaking. It introduced systematic planning and efficiency strategies that reshaped how organizations operated. But there was also a downside. Workers were often treated as interchangeable parts of a machine. The emphasis on control and efficiency left little room for autonomy, creativity, or personal satisfaction on the job. Another important trend in the evolution of formal organizations is outsourcing. Outsourcing refers to the practice of contracting with other organizations or individuals to perform work that was once done in-house. On the surface, it's easy to see why this policy has grown so popular. It saves companies money and often increases efficiency. But outsourcing also comes with trade-offs. While it may benefit the organization by cutting costs, the impact on workers is often less positive. Outsourced employees may face lower pay, fewer benefits, or less job security compared to in-house staff. And in some cases, outsourcing can even weaken an organization's overall performance by reducing internal expertise or creating distance between the company and the people actually doing the work. One of the first big challenges to formal organizations came during the 1960s, when demands for greater equality in the workplace began to grow. Up to that point, many businesses were not only inefficient in how they operated, but also deeply unequal in who they hired and promoted. White men were overwhelmingly favored for management roles, while women and racialized minorities were often excluded from opportunities to advance. Even today, inequality persists. For instance, Canadian men still hold about 2/3 of management positions, which shows that leadership opportunities remain imbalanced. When women and minorities are excluded, organizations end up ignoring the talents of half the population. To be more effective, businesses need to open up by actively including the contributions of all groups, not just the privileged few. That means putting real policies in place to ensure fair access to leadership and advancement opportunities. Research also suggests that women bring unique strengths to organizations, sometimes called the female advantage. Women are more likely to have an information focus, prioritizing communication and collaboration, while men often show an image focus, emphasizing hierarchy and status. Studies of leadership styles highlight 4 qualities often linked to women's approaches. A greater value placed on open communication and information sharing. More flexibility in adapting to change and involving others in decision-making. An emphasis on the interconnectedness of different parts of the organization. And a tendency to provide stronger support and encouragement to subordinates. These qualities can help organizations become more democratic, adaptable, and collaborative, skills that are especially critical in today's rapidly changing environment. Beyond diversity and inclusion, another major challenge for North American organizations has come from global competition. As economic development surged in regions like Europe, Japan, and South Korea, companies abroad became strong competitors. Advances in technology have also fueled the growth of global corporations, forcing local companies to adapt. Japanese organizations, in particular, have been influential. They often operate more like large primary groups, emphasizing loyalty, teamwork, and a sense of belonging among workers. Several practices set them apart from the traditional North American model. New employees are often hired in groups, encouraging solidarity and teamwork from the start. Early in their careers, workers typically receive equal pay and responsibilities, reinforcing a sense of fairness. Many companies also provide lifetime employment, which builds long-term loyalty. Another distinctive practice is cross-training, where workers are trained in multiple areas of the organization so they understand how different parts of the company fit together. Japanese firms also use quality circles, small groups of workers who meet regularly to discuss and solve work-related problems. This gives employees a direct voice in decision-making and
third major
fosters
challenge
collaboration.
for
Formal organizations is the changing nature of work itself. Organizations today look very different from those of the past century, and the expectations placed on workers have shifted as well. Instead of rigid structures built for efficiency and control, many modern organizations now emphasize creativity, collaboration, and adaptability. We can see this shift in 4 key ways. First, there's creative freedom. More organizations now encourage workers to take initiative, experiment, and innovate within their roles. This is especially important in industries that rely on creativity, problem solving, and new ideas to stay competitive. Second, organizations have moved toward competitive work teams. Employees are often grouped into teams that work together to meet goals. These teams encourage collaboration while also fostering a sense of healthy competition that can drive productivity and performance. Third, many organizations are adopting a flatter structure. Instead of layer after layer of managers, flatter organizations reduce the distance between top leadership and frontline employees. This makes decision-making faster and allows organizations to be more agile in responding to change. And fourth, there's greater flexibility. Work is no longer confined to the traditional office space or 9-to-5 schedule. Remote work, flexible hours, and project-based teams that form and dissolve as needed are all part of the new organizational landscape. One way to think about this shift is to compare the old model with the new. For much of the 20th century, organizations were seen as machines, predictable, standardized, and controlled. Today, a better metaphor is the ecosystem, a dynamic system that has to constantly adapt to new challenges and changes in its environment. That said, it's important to remember that not all jobs reflect this new model. Many lower-wage jobs still follow the principles of scientific management with strict rules and close supervision focused more on efficiency than on creativity or flexibility. One of the clearest examples of rationalization in today's world is what sociologist George Ritzer called the McDonaldization of society. This concept comes from studying the McDonald's fast food chain, but the principles it represents have spread far beyond restaurants to many areas of modern life. McDonaldization is built on 4 key organizational principles. The first is efficiency, doing things as quickly as possible, minimizing time and effort. Think about how fast food restaurants are designed to deliver meals in minutes, with every step streamlined for speed. The second is predictability. No matter where you go, the product or service should be the same. A Big Mac in Toronto is supposed to taste exactly like a Big Mac in Tokyo. That predictability gives people confidence in what they're getting. The third principle is uniformity. Instead of unique or customized experiences, mass production ensures that everything looks and feels the same. This standardization is part of why fast food is so consistent, but it also extends to other industries like retail chains or standardized testing in education. The fourth principle is control. Technology and automation are used to regulate the production process and limit human error. In fast food, for example, timers, machines, and automated systems make sure every burger is cooked the same way, but reducing the role of human discretion. These principles make organizations efficient and predictable, but they raise an important question. Can rationality become irrational? When everything is standardized and controlled, workers may feel like they've lost autonomy and creativity, while customers may feel the experience is sterile and impersonal. In other words, The very drive for efficiency can sometimes undermine human satisfaction and lead to outcomes that feel irrational in a broader sense. The COVID-19 pandemic also had a huge impact on organizations, reshaping winners and losers in ways that still affect us today. Small businesses, especially those in personal services like barbershops, nail salons, and restaurants, were hit the hardest. Many of these businesses relied on face-to-face interaction and couldn't easily adapt to lockdowns and restrictions. For many workers and owners, the pandemic was devastating. On the other hand, giant technology companies thrived. As people stayed home, online shopping, streaming, and virtual communication became essential parts of daily life. Companies in tech, delivery services, and e-commerce saw massive growth, with some reporting record profits while smaller competitors struggled to survive. The pandemic also greatly expanded the power of government. Lockdowns, vaccine mandates, and large-scale social spending programs gave governments a central role in everyday life. For some, this was necessary to protect public health and support struggling populations, but it also raised concerns about overreach. Tools developed to track people's movements and social contacts for health purposes could, in theory, be used in the future to monitor dissent or limit political opposition. So, the pandemic didn't just disrupt organizations temporarily, it reshaped the balance of power between small and large businesses, boosted technology's role in daily life, and expanded the reach of government in ways that raise important questions about freedom and surveillance. As we look toward the future, organizations seem to be pulled in two very different directions. On one hand, we see the rise of intelligent organizations. These are flatter and more flexible than traditional bureaucracies, and they encourage open communication and creativity. Workers in these environments often enjoy more autonomy, freedom to innovate, and opportunities to use their skills in meaningful ways. For highly trained professionals, this creates jobs that are not only productive, but also personally fulfilling. On the other hand, many workers remain stuck in what are sometimes called mech jobs. These are routine service jobs that rely heavily on the old principles of scientific management, standardized tasks, close supervision, and little room for creativity. They often come with low wages, limited benefits, and few opportunities for advancement. To make matters worse, downsizing is a constant threat in many industries, leaving workers uncertain about their long-term security. So while some people benefit from greater freedom and flexibility in the post-industrial economy, many others face insecurity, low pay, and limited prospects. In short, the future of organizations looks bright for some, but deeply uncertain for many others, reflecting growing divides in the modern workplace.